Alright lads, welcome back to the channel. So today we've got a little bit of quite a large leak list, to be honest, coming in the next patch of War Thunder. It's mainly naval focused, so most people are going to click off straight away. And considering they're selling incredibly overpriced premiums, I do not blame anyone if they just decide that this update is already kind of a write-off. As always, we're going to go over everything nation by nation, and as I said, this is just a random leak. Could be bullshit, but with all the devlogs we've been seeing recently, it kind of does seem legit. So up first for the Americans, we have the RAH-66A. I'm pretty sure that this is the Comanche. Not really too sure on its capabilities. I think it can have the ability to hide its weapons, kind of like a stealth, but you do have a massive spinning rotor on top, which kind of does ruin the stealth quite a lot, to be honest. This is coming as a premium by the leak. I don't know if that is going to be happening or not. Speaking of premiums, we also have a multi-vehicle pack. This is basically what Guardian was testing last update with the 2 premium Tigers and the Ostwind, I believe. Or it could be another sort of anti-air vehicle. Now the leaker says that we're getting the M4A3 76 high volute suspension system. That is the 5.7 Sherman with the 76mm gun, as well as the M18 GMC, as well as the Skink. I'll be honest with you, the M4A3 76 is dog shit at 5.7, you get constantly up tiered. The M18 GMC, I believe it's around the same battle rating, which is pretty decent. And the Skink, again, it's a terrible air defense weapon in my opinion. The muzzle velocity of the 20mm Paulsons are very, very poor. So the M18, it's a good pickup. Maybe if you already have the Black Cat Premium, you could have 2 premium M18 Hellcats. But again, probably going to be like 30 quid for 2 vehicles that are kind of mid and 1 vehicle that's a little bit above average. Finally, for the Americans, we have the Iowa, the battleship number 61, famous for basically serving into the mid-1980s, being refitted with harpoons and other fancy electronics. But the Iowa started its life, I believe it was actually laid down just after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Obviously, it was a planned ship, it was going to be built anyway. It did see service in World War II, but it didn't see any combat, I don't believe. Basically, this was America's first attempt at a larger, fast battleship. It doesn't have the world's best armor. That's something that many people don't really recognize. The Iowa was never a very well protected ship, at least compared to something like HMS Vanguard, which kind of statted all into protection. But what the Iowa did have was a 50 caliber 16-inch guns with super heavy armor-piercing shells. This gave it excellent deck penetration at long ranges, meaning that you can basically lol pen pretty much anything in theory. Now, is that going to work in-game? I don't really know, because the way Guardian models Battleship is so retarded. Like the guns just feel like you're shooting potatoes at people. But it is pretty cool to see the Iowa coming in the game, and that indeed, if it does come. I don't really think it's going to be meta though, because it isn't really a survivable ship. I believe it only has like 12 inches of armor, which is still substantial, but it's nothing compared to like the Scharnhorst or some of the other more tanky battleships. Moving on to Germany, we have the Hunter Mark 58A. I'm not really too sure about this, so I'm not really going to say much. We also have the IRST SLM. This is basically an air defense system with an incredibly sensitive seeker, which should give you all aspect lock capabilities out to like 8 kilometers, something like that. Like most IR missiles, it's probably going to struggle dealing with helicopters hovering at like 10 kilometers, so KA-50s and KA-52s may still be a struggle. I will admit though, I don't really know what the IRIST is capable of. I know there is one with a radar seeker as well, which may be coming. I'm not really too sure. Seeing as the Americans get the Iowa, the Germans are getting the Bismarck. Now, not really too sure whether they're going to model the fact that every time you fire the guns, the electronics just go offline like it happened in real life. I believe when Bismarck fired its main salvo, it knocked out its own radar, which could be a cool feature, and I don't doubt Guardian would add that, seeing as how petty they are being recently with nations other than the Russians. But we are also getting a premium battleship. This is Gneisenau, or Gneisenau, however you personally prefer to pronounce it. This is going to be the theoretical upgrade that the Germans were planning to give to both the Scharnhorst and the Gneisenau. So they've basically got the same turrets found on the Bismarck class of battleship and replaced the triple 11-inch guns of the Scharnhorst class with 6 15-inch or 38cm cannons. So the tech tree Scharnhorst in game is still going to have it's going to have 9 11-inch guns, but this premium Gneisenau is going to have 6 15-inch guns split between 3 turrets. Now this premium pack is on sale for something absolutely stupid like $80 or something like that. absolutely do not pre-order it or buy it at all. Just wait a year or two until it goes on sale. I will say though, in War Thunder Naval, it doesn't really count how big your guns are. It's more how many barrels you have. So ships with 12 guns, for example, tend to beat ships that have 6 guns or like that. Even if you do have like 6 15-inch guns, you're probably going to lose a fight to something like the Marat, which has 12 12-inch guns, purely because Gaijin just completely models War Thunder naval damage really weird. I don't really know how to explain it. For the Soviets, we have the L-39ZA. I think that this is a trainer aircraft, kind of similar to like a SG-25 Frogfoot. I don't really know too much about it, so I'm not really going to say anything. We also have a Russian multi-pack vehicle. This is the IS-1, the SDKFZ-251 captured. Not really too sure what that is. And then we also have the T-34-85-1944, so a late war T-34-85. After a tiny bit of research, it turns out the SDKFZ is basically the drilling that it's a German air defense vehicle with 3 15mm cannons. Pretty potent, to be honest. It does have very high muzzle velocity, so it should be a nice little balance between firepower and mobility. I do quite like the multi-vehicle pack premiums. You get generally quite good value for money, but I still think that the German one is going to be the best of the 3. Also, for the Russians or Soviets, we have the T-72B3A. This is basically the newer models of T-72Bs that are coming off the production lines at the minute with a few upgrades. I think this vehicle does get some sort of active protection system, which should give it some limited protection from chemical munitions. I'm not sure if the most modern Russian active protection does degrade incoming kinetic energy penetrators, so like SAKO for example. But what am I talking about? This is a Soviet vehicle, so Gaijin is obviously going to buff the shit out of it. Gaijin's personal retirement fund is ever growing. They just need more and more money from the player base, so they're also offering another overpriced naval premium. This is the Sevastopol. Unlike the Gneisenau, which was a theoretically planned ship, but at least it was at least made, I don't even think the Sevastopol was ever finished, if I remember correctly. I think the Germans like put a massive bomb under her when she was in dry dock and blew a hole in the bottom of her or something. If I remember correctly as well, I'm pretty sure they were going to use German guns from the Bismarck on her. In fact, it looks like the Sevastopol and the Gneisenau are both using identical weapons. So both the Gneisenau and the Sevastopol are both using 6 38cm or 15-inch guns. Not worth it in my opinion for the price, and they're also not going to be that useful in the meta. Then we come on to the British and we have another multi-vehicle pack. This is the Avenger Mark 1, the Crusader anti-aircraft weapon, as well as the Sherman Mark 5C, which is the Firefly, I believe. So the Avenger and the Sherman both have the 17-pounder gun, which is excellent. The Crusader AA is a little bit of a letdown though. Again, I'm not going to complain. It's going to be 2 decent premiums at around battle rating 4.7 or 5.0. I'm not quite sure of the battle rating. But if it's around 20 quid, 25 quid, should be a good steal of a good set of premiums to get you going in the British tech tree. We then have the Badger. This is kind of like a big vehicle, kind of what we've been seeing in the French and Japanese tech trees. Kind of like a huge, massive truck with a tiny little gun in it that is only really good if you can flank the enemy team. More of a scout vehicle rather than an actual vehicle that is going to have an effect on the battlefield. I'm not really a massive fan of them. But the big thing coming to the British, at least in these leaks, is going to be HMS Vanguard. The best way to describe this is an incredibly modern ship with very old guns on it. So at the beginning of World War II, the British were looking at building the Lion class of battleships. These were going to be basically the same as HMS Vanguard, but armed with 3 turrets with 16-inch guns. So it would have had 9 16-inch weapons. Now this didn't work out because, as usual, the Admiralty makes the worst decisions imaginable. So they said, why don't we use some guns that we have in stock and build a kind of a variant of HMS Lion, but using older gun barrels, because then that would be ready for World War II. Whereas HMS Lion and the Lion class, they were not going to be ready until like 1950, and no one thought the war would go on that long. So the Vanguard has some of the best armor scheme in the world. In fact, it is probably only second to Yamato in terms of actual armor protection. It also has very good radar systems as well as anti-aircraft weaponry, but it's still using the 15-inch 42 caliber weapon found basically back at World War I. Obviously more modern optics and aiming devices, but it is essentially the exact same gun from the Battle of Jutland, now being used in World War II and obviously here in War Thunder. So we already have the guns in game, such as HMS Warspite, so it's not going to give any sort of buff. You might get a more modern shell, fair enough, but it's not really going to do that much more damage. This means that compared to like the Iowa class or the Yamato, the firepower of Vanguard is simply nowhere near on par. It doesn't have that huge punching power. In fact, one of the reasons the British designed Vanguard to be so heavily protected is because they knew that we would have to get closer to an enemy ship in order to damage it. Kind of a stupid way of designing a ship, but that's what Britain does best, just making the worst possible decisions with potentially huge consequences for the lives of the everyday sailor and soldier. Moving on to the Japanese, we have the F2A. This has been a fan dream, I guess. It's kind of like a Japanese built F-16 with slight modifications. I believe it uses the exact same engine in a slightly modified airframe and with a much more modern radar. Again, I don't know that much about the F2A other than it is very, very capable, at least in terms of it's basically just a high level F-16. I believe the early versions of the F2 were still using Sparrows, but they could add a Fox 3 variant as well, the AAM4. So it would be using the same missiles that we already have on the F-15J in the Japanese tech tree, but a nice addition nonetheless. We also have another SAM system coming, this time to the Japanese. This is listed as a 3.5 ton truck, SAM-1, Type 81C. Now I'm guessing that this is just going to be the same as the Type 81 we already have in game, but instead of using IR missiles, this is going to use an active radar homing head. This could pose a threat to enemy vehicles, but I very much doubt it has an IFF seeker, so you could accidentally shoot down friendly planes and helicopters very easily with this as well. And finally, for the Japanese, we have the mighty Yamato. This is armed with 18.1 inch guns, the largest guns ever produced that actually saw combat in World War II. I believe there may have been bigger ones produced, but these were the biggest ones actually sent to sea. Yamato, obviously like a 70,000 ton ship when I believe Iowa was like 50,000 maybe. But yeah, it's like literally twice the size of every other ship at sea during World War II. It was sunk by torpedoes and bombs of the US Navy, so it's probably going to be incredibly unbalanced. Not really too sure if this is actually going to come this update, because I would think they'd struggle to balance it. It's got like a retarded amount of armor. It's got really good deck armor. There may be the very early war World War II Yamato where it had basically next to no proper anti-aircraft weaponry. The only downside about Yamato is it doesn't really have the best fire control system. The Japanese were quite far behind when it came to radar, ranging and fire control, that sort of stuff. But yeah, I'm a bit skeptical that the Yamato is actually going to come, because I just think it'd cause problems for matchmaking. You'd have to put it like 0.7 battle rating higher than any other ship. So yeah, I think Gaijin, well actually it is Gaijin, they do make bad decisions literally every day, so it probably is coming, who knows. Bit of a lonely addition for the Chinese this update so far. We have the CS SA5. This is a large, basically convoy protection weapon, I'd guess you'd really say. It's armed with 8 fire and forget IR seeker missiles. They do have quite a large flare resistance though, so they should be pretty decent, but this is not going to be a very long range weapon at all. It does have a 30mm rotary cannon though, should give it very good performance against the sides and rears of enemy vehicles. So while the Tor in the Chinese tech tree does give you good long range protection, this thing should be more of a SHORAD type system, so a nice addition, but unless it's folded with another air defense, it might be a little tedious to grind this thing out. It's also quite lonely for the Italians, as so far we've only got the Roma. This is another World War II battleship armed with 15-inch guns. I believe these were very high velocity though, and I believe the build quality wasn't the best and the gun dispersion was quite large. Anyway, the Roma was sank by the Schmitz Fritz X bomb, is it called? Yeah, the one that basically looks like a big X, the Call of Duty kill streak as well, if you remember that shit game. Basically, it was the first ship sank by radio-controlled bombs, and it was sunk as it was on its way to, I believe, Egypt to surrender to the British. But yeah, should be a good addition. It's nowhere near as good as like Yamato or Iowa, but it should be a good addition to the Italian territory. For France, we're getting a premium at top tier finally. Well, it's another copy and paste. It is the Leopard 2A4NL, the OTCO. Now, we already have a Dutch Leopard 2A4 in the tech tree, but this is going to be a copy and paste with a camo net or something. It's going to be quite lonely, to be honest, because France doesn't have any other top tier, or it doesn't have any other vehicles at battle rating 10.7. They're either going to be, so you're either going to have to up tier this tank or play in a lineup with a lot of vehicles around battle rating 9.7 and 10.0. So it's probably not going to be the best grinder because you don't really have backup. But that being said, it is a Leopard 2A4. It is an incredibly flexible vehicle. It does kind of take the piss how Gaijin just add Leopard 2A4s to every tech tree now because they know they sell because they're that versatile. It's very, very scummy in my opinion, but like I said, Gaijin's yacht fund just needs more and more money from the player base. We also have the Leclerc MSC. This is basically a very early model of the French main battle tank. I don't really know any details about it. Probably going to use the same autoload and gun, just with a weaker sabot shell, or maybe even just a chemical round, and it might put it at like 10.7, so the vehicle, the tech tree is a little bit more flushed out. I don't really know though, but we'll see, I guess. And finally for the French, we have the Richelieu. This is another fast battleship for the French. This has 8, I think it's like 13.2 inch guns. I could be wrong, I can't remember the gun caliber, but like the Strasbourg, I believe, or some other class, it has all of its guns up front. This is because the French envision these ships as kind of like battle cruisers where they'd be chasing off other ships rather than being chased themselves, which didn't really go to plan. For example, at Mers El Kabir, one of the ships was running away from HMS Hood, and obviously because all the guns are at the front of the ship, they couldn't return fire. Now I think HMS Hood actually stripped a turbine and then had to stop, but not the greatest of designs in theory, well, in practice. In War Thunder, you're never going to have a situation where ships are behind you, so that issue isn't really that much of an issue. But yeah, the French naval tech tree, it's the only thing in the game that I've not even bothered grinding. It's just not really any point. I am heavily biased and tired of playing top tier War Thunder, so that's my excuse. Maybe the French naval tree is really, really good, but I will not be finding out. For the Swedish, we have the Eld 98 Giraffe 1X. This is kind of like, I'd imagine the vehicle itself was designed for fighting in the Arctic. It's basically like Caterpillar tracks, but rubber. It has 4 IRIS-T all aspect missiles, but it's a tongue twister, kind of like the one that we're getting in the German tech tree as well. You only have 4 missiles. It does have a very potent radar, so you will be able to detect people at long ranges, and I'm still a little bit skeptical about the range of your missiles. And finally for the video, for the Israelis, we have the Spider AIO. I'll be honest, this kind of just looks like an Israeli version of the IRIS-T. It's kind of like a truck with a little radar that fires missiles on the back of it. Israel does need a top tier air defense vehicle. This could be a solution, but again, top tier Israel is pretty bad at the minute, so maybe not the one that people are going to be jumping out the seats to go and grind. But I can't deny top tier Israel, you basically have no air defense really, so this is needed. Anyway lads, that's all I've got for you today. Who knows what is going to be coming. The obvious one that I doubt would come is going to be the Yamato, but if you're not really a fan of the naval side, then this update looks kind of skinny pickings in my opinion. There's nothing really big coming that I can tell in terms of both air or ground. Maybe the F2A is going to be the star for most people. Maybe the T-72B3A if you're a Soviet simp. But yeah lads, thank you very much for watching. Hopefully I'll see you in a future video.